Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Automated Advantage. Today, we're talking to Moe Frijay, who is the CEO of the Hippie Recruiter. It's a great episode. And if you listen, you'll find out how he came about the name and a bunch of business advice for people starting out. So, hopefully, this is a great episode and everybody enjoys. Well, welcome everybody to the Automated Advantage. Our guest this week is Moe, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and his company.
Hey, my name's Moe Frijay. The company is the Hippie Recruiter. We work with healthcare recruiters so that they can make better, long lasting relationships, prevent objections, and ultimately make more placements.
So it's an interesting place to be, and obviously a very specific niche. So tell us a little bit about how that came about. How long have you been in business? What hole you saw, and maybe why you do it a little differently to what other people do.
Sure. So the Hippie Recruiter is fairly new. We started in April of this year. I've been in the healthcare staffing industry since 2008. And have been a recruiter, been a team lead, been a recruiting manager, been a recruiting director, all that jazz. Predominantly in the travel space, with a short 3 year pit stop in the per diem space. So along the way, I discovered that most agencies, most of the time, onboard their recruiters with this is how we do it here. And then they're pretty much left to their own devices as long as they're putting people to work. When they're not putting people to work, then everybody gets real interested, in the KPIs. How many phone calls did you make? How many contacts? How many submissions and all that jazz. But I discovered kind of early on that, again, at most agencies, most of the time, there's not a dedicated trainer. The manager now used to be the best recruiter in the agency, who knows their way to do it. Or in some cases, there's no real. I don't want to say leadership because that's not the right word, but there's no real consistent movement towards making sure that our recruiters are highly skilled all the time, that they don't slip into bad habits, that they're moving with the market trends beyond what their own teams see. So early on, it was real easy. Either you made numbers or you were gone. Um, it was easier, I think, conceptually to replace somebody than to spend some time with them. And the reason for that is at a small agency where the recruiting manager might still be on production, well, that person is worried about their own desk, and they don't have a ton of time to coach their team, right? So it's more reactive than proactive. In a larger agency where the manager maybe isn't on production or they don't have a manager, just a director. Well, that person's involved with strategic projects with the agency. And again, it's a time thing. So what we do is we fill that space because, well, I'm not on production. My desk is your desk is my desk. So I have the ability to look at the process from the 50,000 foot view, and then we can drill down into the processes, what's working, what's not working, and then ultimately at each recruiter's desk where they need the most assistance. We're not going to say that folks are doing a bad job because I believe that folks do the very best they can every day. But if the tools that you're using or the script that you're using or the techniques that you're using don't match the current market climate, well, then your results go down. As things change, we have to change so that our results improve, and that's where we come in.
Now that makes a lot of sense. I have to ask you this question, then I have some follow-on questions to that. But how did the name come about? It's a very catchy name.
Uh, so, um, like I said, I live near Charleston, South Carolina. I live near the beach, and so I'm kind of a beach bum. And then I thought, well, that's not a really good name, the beach bum. That doesn't really help anybody. And so the idea was actually kind of a spinoff of an organization that I had the privilege to meet the founders years ago now, called the Gypsy Nurse.
Oh,
And the Gypsy Nurse started as a community for travelers, and then it's grown through the years. And I thought, wow, that's so. All my friends are like, "Oh, you're such a hippie now. You live at the beach. You do this. You do that." And I'm like, "Oh, what?" And so that's how we got to the Hippie Recruiter.
that's perfect.
And it's it's unique and it's kind of, but being a hippie for our purposes is not using patchouli oil and all that and all that other stuff. It's more like being honest, being insightful, being proactive, being positive, being innovative, being encouraging. So we took a really cool name and then stacked our values into the name, because that's what it's all about. We're in the business of taking great care of folks who in healthcare, their job is to take great care of folks. So
Yeah,
that's how we do that.
I love it. You'd appreciate this. I bought a 1971 VW bus, so I'm
Right. There you go.
have a similar hippie trend. So with the health market and things like that, I mean, it feels to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's one of those industries that appears to be thriving right now. And everywhere I look, it says shortages. And I mean, is that an accurate statement? And is that kind of the hole that you're filling for folks?
The industry there's definitely a nursing shortage. I mean, there's no getting around that, and the nursing shortage isn't going away anytime soon. So what we've noticed though in the years, so we've the pre-pandemic where travel nursing and nurse staffing is kind of ticking along like this, and then the pandemic happens and everything goes bonkers, right? So pay rates are astronomical. Um, and a lot of folks jump into the industry. Agencies that staffed light industrial, that staffed manufacturing, that staffed IT saw this opportunity, and so they jumped in. And what happened, because we went from the status quo to this huge surge in demand and a huge surge in pay rates to go with that demand, the industry got to be very transactional during the pandemic. I don't think it was intentional. Um, But recruiters and agencies commoditize clinicians because they're just trying to get people to fill these jobs. And then as a result of that, and then the advent of like Vivian as a job board, um, where all the companies list their job and they list what they're paying, like right up front, right? So that caused then the clinicians to commoditize agencies and recruiters. So now we're price shopping, which really changed the whole dynamic of our industry, the likes of which we had not seen since the economic crash of 2008. It was the last great big upheaval in travel nurse staffing. So what happened is our industry got to be super transactional, and then the pandemic ended, and the rates went down, and then they went below where they were before the pandemic, and so the whole market's changed, and it's still not quite, it's not leveled out yet. But if we look at the companies that are publicly owned in our sector, cross country, AMN, travel nursing is still down. So they're doing less business this year than they did last year and the year before and the year before. So things have changed. There is a shortage, but the sector as a whole has contracted with available workers because a lot of people left nursing. They left bedside nursing after the pandemic, for a multitude of reasons. But so we have a lot of people who've left the industry, who've retired, who've moved away from the bedside. And then we also notice that in some cases, nursing school enrollment has actually declined, um, And in some cases, it's not because there aren't enough candidates; there aren't enough places for them to go. So it's starting to level out, and we'll probably know more in the next 12 to 18 months what the new normal is going to look like for our industry. Typically and historically, the first quarter after a presidential election is great for everybody in healthcare staffing because all of the uncertainty that happens in an election year, we know what's going to happen for the next 4 years come November. So then in Q1, everything just kind of picks back up, right? We know where we're going and what direction everything's going. That was not the case in this election cycle, um, predominantly due to the tariffs and how that kind of made the market get really freaky. You know, if they work the way the administration hopes that they will, then we should get to the new normal in 6 to 12 months. If that works good. If it doesn't, then we're probably closer to that 12 to 18, maybe 24-month mark before we figure out what the new normal is going to be. In the meantime, the VMSs and MSPs now control about 80% of the open travel orders. So to do business, you have to go through a third party. Um, the rates that the agency get have come down. The fees that the agencies pay those VMSs and MSPs have gone up, um, which means that margins are much tighter and much thinner in travel staffing. And so it's a very interesting time to be in our business.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that in a second, but just as far as so looking at your ideal customer, like who are you trying to attract, and then maybe how are you attracting them?
So we serve agencies that we would say are small to mid-size. They have probably three to 3 to 9 recruiters. They may or may not have a dedicated recruiting manager that's off production. But usually it's a smaller shop. Some of our larger enterprise agencies, like Epic, for example, they've got internal training teams that do this for the agency. It's what they do. And then there's some other agencies that do that as well. But most agencies don't. So that's our target market is that small to medium size agency. They're doing, probably um, less than 5 million a year in gross revenue. So there's a lot of room for growth for them. And our marketing is predominantly on LinkedIn. The Hippie Recruiter has a channel on YouTube. It's on Facebook, and we're on LinkedIn as well. And so that's where we do most of our outreach. And then, of course, like everybody else, we pick up the phone call
Yeah.
and say, hey, my name is, this is what we do. How can we help you?
Interesting. And so my other question was going to be, and I'm going to be respectful when I say this, but I think you and I are of about the same stage in life. And I started a business 2, 3 months ago. You started in April. I mean, how's that come about? How's I mean, just tell me a little bit about that as far as taking, it's a reasonable risk, right? Doing something at at a later stage in life.
Well, sometimes being at this stage, you've accumulated more experience than the average bear, let's say. And so circumstances aligned themselves in the spring where I was able to do this. Um, and but it wasn't just something that I was like, oh, hey, this is what I'm going to do. This is something that's been percolating for me since probably 2009 or 10. And because I noticed right away that training wasn't a priority. Um, and I came from the service where training is the priority. If you're not war fighting, you're preparing to go war fight. Um, and so I've always been like the teammate that would say, "Oh, well, hey, this is how I do it." You know, we've somebody new come in, they're struggling, or maybe somebody's just kind of in a rut. Hey, try this, try that. Um, so I have been very open about how I make the sausage. and what works for me. And so I helped a couple of agencies as an employee develop some playbooks, um, and would be actively involved with my teammates to help them be more successful. And then as I moved up and became, like the recruiting manager, well, then that was my job, you know. And so, but it all started because, like I mentioned earlier, I noticed that it was easier for an agency to let somebody go than to spend time with them to develop them. Um, and I feel like we let some really good folks leave because nobody had the time to give them just a little bit extra that they needed.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're here.
Well, that's, I mean, it's such a, I appreciate the concept because I think that happens way too much. The corporate dollar, whatever it is, and just overrides sometimes doing the right thing. But kind of taking to the military background. So I mentioned this to you in the opening. So my son is a United States Navy corpsman. So he's associated with the medical field.
He's a
Um,
doc.
he's a
One of
doc.
my favorite people is an infantry soldier.
And so he's actually going to the infantry school to be their doc, and that's why he's moving
Awesome.
to Quantico. But my question is, I'll tell you a quick story, and I'm going to ask you the question. So in January they came back from deployment, and I got to meet them in Hawaii, and I sailed back from Hawaii to San Diego for a week on the destroyer with them, and I
Very
got to
cool.
see them in action. And I actually put a little LinkedIn story out the other day because it was so interesting to me in how, and I'll say this with all the love and respect in the world, when they're taking their time off, how they screw around and they're looking at videos. But man, when they're on, they're on.
Hmm.
And everybody knows their job and everybody trusts their teammates. So, kind of taking that and knowing that you've probably lived something like that, what have you applied in your life that you might have learned from a military background?
Well, like you mentioned in service, it's all about, doing your job and taking care of the person to your left and to your right. Um, and in staffing, I've been really fortunate and I worked in some teams that were like that we looked out for each other. We kind of paid attention to, I'm looking for this kind of nurse to go to this location. And then a couple of days later, that job would pop up and you'd be like, oh, hey, are you still looking for this over here? Where if the team does well and all the recruiters do well, then the agency does well. And we all grow together, right? When, but I've also been unfortunate enough to work in some agencies that weren't like that, where it was kind of a zero sum game. I had to write as many contracts as I could so that you couldn't write my contract, we get into these like Shark Tank kind of situations where you get three people chasing the same candidate for the same job off the same team. And I struggled with that just because of that whole, mission first, people always kind of mentality that I grew up with. So we want to make sure that when at the end of the day, that it's a team. So for me, recruiting is a lot like baseball. So it's a team sport, but it's an individual event, right? So on a baseball team in the National League, it doesn't matter what your position is, you step into the batter's box. When you're in the batter's box, it's just you. And that's kind of how recruiting is. But when a hitter goes into a slump, well, they see the hitting coach, they go see the team psychologist or therapist. Um, they get extra reps, and somebody looks at on film what's wrong with their swing, what's broken. Do we need to adjust our stance? Do we need to adjust our hand position? Do we need, what do we need to fix? In recruiting, it's not like that. In recruiting, when you go into a slump, your boss goes, oh, don't worry about it. It'll be okay. Well, it's not okay because you're in a slump. And now you know that your boss knows that you're in a slump. And so now you're all up in your head. And sometimes the hardest thing for us to do as recruiters is to get out of our own headspace so that we can be engaged and we can actively listen and be an active participant in those conversations that are so important to the process. So what we hope to do is be the hitting coach um, for recruiting teams. So when their folks are struggling, we can help them get to the next level. When they're doing good, we can help them get to the next level. When they're doing great, we can help them get to the next level. And that's how we do that. But for me, it's all about the team first. If we take good care of the team, then the team develops some cohesion, and then they kind of look out for each other, and then everybody grows off of everybody else's successes. Unlike, I'm doing good, Greg, you're not having a great day. I feel bad for you, buddy, but I don't have time to help you out because I got my own thing to do.
Yeah.
We want to help teams care as much about their teammates' success as they do their own success, because that lends to the team's success.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's such an the overused. We have a culture, and well, I think people throw that out, and there's very few companies that actually live that, and it's a good. I worked for a company just a couple of years ago that actually lived that, and to the silly things like you talk about helping each other out, but simple things like we used to have a you first Friday, so every Friday afternoon was you take care of yourself, like go if you have a customer meeting, take care of your customer, but take time off, go to the beach, take a picture of yourself at the beach, enjoy that, and it permeates through the organization. And then I've worked at other places that say we have this culture. And to your point, is if somebody's in a slump or not doing well, it's so easy to just throw them out the door because they're not doing well. And it's like, it's a big, as I grow my business, it's one of the factors. I actually have a board right next to me. It's like all of my values, and it's like one of my top values. I'm like, just don't forget that. So I appreciate you saying that. We're speaking from the same hymn book.
Yes.
So a question that now, the buzz of the moment, the buzz of the times. And I don't think it's going to leave us for any time soon. But artificial intelligence, how has that impacted your industry? Have you guys been able to take advantage of anything in that space, or just
No,
what?
AI, like the internet's a fad, man. It's not going to be here very long. No, actually, I'm real fortunate that uh, as kind of a sideline, we were consulting with a couple of AI agencies uh, who are trying to build a multitude of tools, but one of which is the best virtual recruiting assistant. Um, and so there's a roadmap where the virtual assistant would live in Slack or in Teams, some kind of community board, and then be able to do a lot of what an actual assistant would do. They can screen calls and they can collect documents and help with packets and all that stuff. Um, the one place where AI hasn't really like, so first of all, let me say that AI for the sake of AI is pointless. If you're going to adopt a tool, that tool's got to be able to solve specific problems for you, whether it's initial outreach, whether it's campaigns, whether it's packet preparation, whether it's part of the retention piece, or all of that. But I think the agencies that that judiciously apply the technology with a specific outcome in mind, they'll find themselves a couple of steps ahead of those who are just like, oh, it's shiny, it's new, it's pretty, let's just do it all. Well, when you do it all, you don't do any of it very well. Um, and there's a lot of, like, even with ATSs, so the applicant tracking systems, a lot of them have got some AI tools built in, and there's a flow. But most of the time, when most agencies buy a new ATS, they'll get it, do all the back end work, all the APIs and everything else to make it talk to all the places it needs to talk to. And then they roll it out to the team. And then 2 or 3 weeks or a month later, then somebody from the company comes to show you how to best use the tool. Well, in the time between us getting it and them coming, well, everybody on the team has already figured out the best way for them for what they know. So So we build all these bad habits right out of the gate. Um, it'll be the same thing with AI adoption if the adoption and the best practices don't come at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and so that would be like my one piece of advice for agency owners. If you bought something brand new, and don't give it to your team until the subject matter expert can sit down with you guys in the collective and say, this is the best way to do all of these things that we can do. Um,
Yeah.
otherwise, we get to the path of least resistance to figure out how to do what we know we need to do, but oftentimes miss the time savings or the real good stuff inside because we don't, as an end user, you don't know all of its capabilities when you first get it. So you just figure out what you need to know. And then that becomes your pattern.
Yeah.
And then by the time the rep gets there, you're trying to break habits and learn all this new stuff at the same time. So it's a smoother process with much less friction if the rollout and the onboarding happen simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think that's a very really good comment. And I mean, at the end of the day, it sounds obvious, but automating bad processes is still a bad process. You're just going to get to the bad end result a lot faster. And the other thing
Exactly.
too is, I think you alluded to this too, but I mean, at the same time, this big, oh my gosh, it's going to replace people and stuff. It may, but I don't think it's to the extent that people do it. What I've been training people saying is, look, you're just going to get to the answer a little faster. So it's cutting down some mundane tasks. It's cutting down some boring events, so that when you're engaging now, people are engaging with not only maybe people that you should be, your customer, your recruit, those types of things. You're spending more time doing those types of things. I think that's where it provides a lot of value. But at the same time, your point is valid. It's like just it needs to be embraced, but ChatGPT is not AI. There's so much more else to do out there. So I think, I mean, you're right. I think there's so much to do with it that I think we're just scratching the surface right now, and it's just getting better and better by the day.
I agree. And with agentic AI, the agent can do initial outreach by SMS or by email, or in some cases even by voice.
Mhm.
The agent can do the qualified, interested, available part. The agent can collect documents that are open source. Nurses, for example, to verify a license. The American Heart Association to verify a credential. And so there are a lot of things that recruiters would typically spend a lot of time doing that now they don't have to do,
Mhm.
which ideally frees them up to have more good conversations with qualified candidates. Another great thing that an AI agent should be able to do is to mine your database. There are two ways to recruit. You can find people for the jobs that you have, or you can find jobs for the people that you have. They're both equally important,
Yeah.
but it's two different styles, right? It's two different things that were two different branches of the same tree. So what we want our recruiters to have as much time as we can give them. Take all this admin stuff off their plate, all the nug work, so that they can go into the discovery call with a synopsis that's not just the resume, because the agent said, "Oh, look, they've got 5 years here, and they've done this, and this is what they're really interested in." And it gives the recruiter more information to start with, which leads to a better conversation, which is becoming kind of a lost art because during the pandemic, it was a very transactional industry.
Mhm.
Um, and now that the pandemic's over and has been over, the competition's much tighter. So now the quality of those phone calls, each phone engagement is exponentially more valuable today than it was in 2018, because it was a different market, or 2019 even. Um,
Yeah.
and so we want to prepare folks to maximize those engagements.
And I think that's a real, I mean, again, I appreciate that concept because I think that's the thing, the lost art of true engagement, right? Like it's now if you're doing the work and you're showing that added value. Yeah, anybody can, I say anybody, most people can make money in a transactional economy. It's if you're
Sure.
half decent, but when it gets to where you really need to show value and things like that, just doing that little extra pushes you pushes you
Yeah.
closer to the end goal. So no, this
You
is.
know, the more that we know about our clinicians, our candidates,
Mhm,
what's important to them,
mhm,
why it's important to them, how it fits into their big plan. When I was a recruiter for the service, we I would always have what we called the hopes, dreams, and aspirations conversation. What's the big picture? How does this fit in? And how does that help you get to where you want to go? And it's the same thing here. Recruiting is a people. All businesses are people businesses, right? We
mhm.
all interact with other humans, but when you're in recruiting or you're in sales, you have to know, you have to find out what's really going on and why that thing is affecting that person in that way, so that if they if they get what they want, it moves them one step closer or maybe two steps closer. When they don't get what they want, what happens then? How does that affect them professionally? How does it affect them personally? But when we don't spend the time to go, oh, tell me, Greg, why is that important to you now? When we don't have a real conversation, we don't know any of that stuff. They say, hey, I'm interested. And we say, great, let's go. Well, I would say maybe we should tap the brakes and go, I'm really glad you're interested. What is it about this opportunity that you're really interested in? And then they're going to say whatever it is they're going to say. And then we're going to say, sounds good. But why is that important to you, though?
Yeah. Yeah, and
So that
driving
we,
for the end result that somebody cares about. I mean, that's the thing, right?
yeah,
Again, transactional. It's easy to jam a square peg into a round hole and stuff like that. But at the same time, to your point is, if you do it right up front, you find the right fit for the right organizer for the right person, in that everything just meshes. Your chances of longevity in that role or growth or whatever your objectives were, to your point earlier, just increases. And it again,
yeah,
sometimes these things where they talk about common sense and not, it's like it's just often not the case. People are just wanting to push their stuff on you so that they can either get you to sign a contract and move on, right? It's like,
right, right, right. And part of that too, I think, is that everybody knows conceptually and intellectually that you have to build rapport, that you have to create a relationship. It's on the one hand. On the other hand, when you're in a slump or the market's really tight, your boss doesn't care about the relationship you're trying to build. Your boss is worried about you putting them to work somewhere. Uh, and so then it gets to be, it's a challenge, to walk that line between being a good recruiter and a good business partner with your candidate, to know what they're looking for and to know why it's important to them and to know if you can even help them out while at the same time being productive.
yeah. No, this is great.
Yeah.
This is a phenomenal conversation. So the last couple of minutes we have, you said this business was percolating for several years and you took the leap. So maybe the last question becomes whether you're thinking about it, whether you've been thinking about it for a long time. Like, what's your advice to somebody who say, you know what, I'm considering doing something. What should they think about, or, and maybe the one lesson that you learned as well as you were launching your own initiative.
So if you're thinking about it, go do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 100%. You have to know what you're doing, what you want to do, who your audience is, and connect with them. So you can spend months developing the best landing page, the best this, the best that, the best other. and have it all put together, and you're months down the road with no business. Or you can jump in with an 80% solution in your own mind, get those first two or three or four customers, and then the process will develop itself out. But strong foundation, strong commitment to your core values. Not everybody's a good fit to work with us. We're not a good fit to work with everybody. Um, but if it's something that you believe in and you know that you have the skill set, you have the inclination, the discipline, and the persistence, if you have those four things, man, the only thing keeping you back is you.
No, I love that. I think those are wise words to finish on. I'll just mine as well as somebody actually literally wants to give me money to help them, and I'm not going to take it because I don't think it's the right thing to do. And I think that's a foundation too. Like you said, not everybody's the right fit. I really want to help them, but I know that I can't help them be successful. And it's like, let's just move on and find something else to do. And I think,
Right.
you've,
I would rather point somebody in a better direction
yep,
than take their money.
yeah, me too.
If I'm not the right guy for them, then let me help you find the right thing.
Yeah, agreed. Well, Mo, I really appreciate this conversation. I'm going to end the recording and thank you for joining us.
Been a pleasure. It's been great, Greg. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.